The sickening crack of leather against flesh was the only sound she heard over the drumming of her own heart. Virginia Davies was running for her life. Her bare feet, raw and bleeding, pounded the hard-packed dirt of the Montana prairie. The year was 1875, and this land offered no mercy. Not for a woman alone, not for a woman fleeing a monster. Blood, sweat, and tears mingled in a sticky stream down her temple. The afternoon sun was a merciless hammer, beating down on her torn, stained dress. In the hazy distance, a single weathered barn shimmered like a mirage. It was her only hope. "You can run, but you can't hide." The voice was slurred, drunken, but it carried on the wind, a promise of more pain. It was her stepfather, Thomas Davies. She could hear his uneven, stumbling footsteps behind her, but she didn't dare look back. She just pushed harder, her lungs screaming for air, her legs threatening to buckle. The barn grew closer with every agonizing step. A sanctuary, a tomb. She didn't know which, but it was all she had. She finally reached it, collapsing behind the far wall where the shadows were deepest. She curled into a tight ball, pressing her back against the rough, sun-bleached planks, trying to make herself disappear. Every breath was a fresh agony, her ribs screaming from the beating he'd given her just an hour before. She squeezed her eyes shut, praying to a God she wasn't sure was listening. "Don't let him find me. Please, don't let him find me." The minutes dragged into an eternity. The sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the vast sky in brutal strokes of orange and purple. The only sounds were the soft nickering of horses from inside the barn and the whisper of the wind through the tall grass. Virginia remained perfectly still, a statue carved from fear. Then she heard it. Footsteps. But they weren't the drunken stagger of her stepfather. These were steady, purposeful, and they were getting closer. Her heart hammered against her bruised ribs. She buried her face in her knees, trying to will herself invisible. The footsteps stopped right beside her. "Madam, are you all right?" The voice was deep, calm, and laced with a concern that was so foreign it felt like a threat. Virginia's head snapped up. Her green eyes, wide with terror, met the steady gaze of a tall man. He wore a dusty leather vest and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face. He looked surprised, but more than that, he looked worried. "Please," she whispered, her voice a dry rasp, "don't tell anyone I'm here." The man crouched down, keeping a respectful distance. He moved slowly, deliberately, like a man who knew how to handle a frightened animal. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, his voice gentle. "My name's Ryder Xavier. This is my ranch." Virginia flinched as he took off his hat. He was younger than she'd thought, maybe in his late 20s, with dark hair and kind eyes that crinkled at the corners. But it was what he did next that froze the blood in her veins. He didn't just look at her face. His gaze swept over her, taking in the bruises, the torn dress, the blood. And his eyes didn't hold pity. They held a cold, hard anger. "You're hurt," he stated, his voice now a low rumble. "Who did this to you?" Years of fear kept her silent. Trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. But there was something in his gaze, a quiet strength that chipped away at the wall she'd built around herself. "My stepfather," she finally breathed. "He'll kill me if he finds me." Ryder's jaw tightened into a line of granite. "He won't find you here," he said. And it wasn't a comfort, it was a vow. "You have my word." He held out a calloused hand. "Can you stand? There's a house just beyond that ridge. Food, water, a safe place to rest." She hesitated. Her mind was a whirlwind of terror and suspicion. This was the frontier. Kindness was often a mask for something far worse. But she had nowhere to go. No money, no one. With a trembling hand, she placed it in his. As he helped her to her feet, the world tilted sideways. Black spots danced in her vision. Ryder caught her without a second thought, his arms strong and solid around her. "Easy now," he murmured, his voice close to her ear. "I've got you." Leaning against this stranger, this man who had found her at her lowest, Virginia felt something she hadn't felt in years. It was a fragile, terrifying flicker of hope. "Thank you," she whispered against his chest. Ryder looked down at the bruised, broken woman in his arms. His expression softened, but the anger in his eyes remained, banked like coals in a forge. "From this moment on, no one's going to hurt you again," he promised. You're under my protection now." He promised her protection, a promise he had no idea would cost him everything. The walk to the homestead felt like crossing a desert. Every step was a fresh wave of pain, but Virginia refused his offer to carry her. Pride was all she had left. She leaned on his arm, the simple cabin with smoke curling from its chimney, a distant beacon. As they got closer, the cabin door swung open. An older woman with silver-streaked hair and a weathered face stepped out. Her eyes widened in alarm when she saw them. "Good heavens, Ryder! What happened?" she cried, rushing to meet them. "Martha, this lady needs help," Ryder said, his voice clipped and serious. "Get a bath ready. Find some clean clothes." Martha's gaze swept over Virginia, taking in the bruises and the tattered dress. There was no judgment in her eyes, only a deep, weary sadness, as if she'd seen this kind of brutality before. "Of course. Come inside, dear. You're safe here." The cabin was warm, filled with the scent of baking bread and strong coffee. It was a world away from the squalor and fear she'd been living in. Virginia felt like a stray dog brought in from a storm, too dirty to touch anything. "I'll fetch the doctor," Ryder said, turning toward the door. "No!" The word ripped from her throat, raw with panic. "Please, no doctor. My stepfather. He might hear about it in town." Ryder paused, his hand on the doorknob. He studied her, his expression unreadable. "Those injuries need a doctor's hand." "Martha can help me," Virginia pleaded, her eyes darting to the older woman. "Please, just for tonight." He stared at her for a long moment, an internal battle playing out across his face. Finally, he gave a curt nod. "All right, but if you're worse by morning, I'm getting Doc Porter, and that's final." He stepped outside, leaving her alone with Martha. The older woman's touch was surprisingly gentle as she guided Virginia to a small room off the main living area. "Let's get you cleaned up, child," she said softly. "Then we'll see to those bruises." The warm bath was a forgotten luxury. As Martha carefully washed the dirt and dried blood from Virginia's skin, she clucked her tongue in sympathy. Her hands were efficient, applying a cool, soothing salve to the worst of the swelling. But as she worked, her kindness felt practiced, almost professional. "How long has this been happening, dear?" Martha asked, her voice low. "Since my mother died 3 years ago," Virginia whispered, staring at her hands in the water. "It got worse when we came west. He wanted to marry me off to one of his gambling partners, to settle a debt." Martha's expression hardened into a grim mask. "Well, he won't be settling any debts with you. Ryder won't let any harm come to you." "Why?" Virginia asked, the question escaping before she could stop it. "Why would he help a stranger?" Martha paused, her hands still. She looked at Virginia, her eyes sharp and intelligent. "Ryder's a good man. He knows what it's like to be alone. Now you need rest." Exhaustion finally claimed her, and Virginia slept a deep, dreamless sleep. She awoke to sunlight streaming through the window and the smell of bacon. For a blissful second, she forgot everything. Then the terror of the day before came rushing back. She crept into the main room. Ryder was at the table, a newspaper spread before him. He stood the moment he saw her. "Good morning. How are you feeling?" "Better, thank you," she said, her voice small. She was wearing a simple blue dress Martha had left for her, and she felt intensely aware of his gaze. He wasn't just looking at her, he was studying her, assessing her. Martha brought a platter of food from the kitchen. "Sit, both of you, eat." The simple act of sharing a meal at a table felt alien, almost overwhelming. Virginia ate slowly, trying to ignore the weight of Ryder's stare. "I need to know his name," Ryder said finally, breaking the silence. "Your stepfather. Will he come looking for you?" "Thomas Davies," she replied, setting her fork down. "He won't stop. He told me. He told me I was his investment." Ryder's face was a thundercloud. "You're not going back to him. I'll ride into town today, see what I can find out." "I can't stay here," Virginia protested, a knot of panic tightening in her stomach. "I can't put you in this danger." "And go where?" Ryder's voice was gentle but firm. "With no money, no one to vouch for you? This territory eats women like you alive. Stay here, at least until we figure this out." His sincerity was disarming. Why do you care so much? She whispered. He leaned forward, his dark eyes locking onto hers. When I found you behind that barn, something shifted. I can't explain it, but I know I can't turn my back on you. I won't. Before she could process his words, the sound of hoofbeats echoed outside. Ryder was on his feet in an instant, moving to the window. His shoulders relaxed slightly. It's Sheriff Miller, he said. Friend of mine. I sent a boy for him last night. A sheriff. The law. For a moment, Virginia felt a surge of relief, but then she saw the look on Martha's face as she peered through the curtain. It wasn't relief. It was a flicker of something else, something that looked a lot like suspicion. The sheriff was a tall, imposing man with a silver badge and cold, calculating eyes. He removed his hat as he entered, nodding politely to Virginia. Ma'am, Ryder here tells me you're in a bit of trouble. Virginia found herself recounting the whole horrific story. Her mother's death, Davies's transformation from a respectable man to a monster, the mounting debts, and the final terrible proposal to sell her to another man. I ran when he told me, she finished, her voice trembling. That's when he did this. She gestured to her bruised face. Sheriff Miller's expression was grave. Davies has been in town a couple of weeks, throwing money around, making a nuisance of himself. He sighed, a theatrical sound. But legally, as your stepfather, he has certain rights. He has no right to beat her, Ryder cut in, his voice sharp as broken glass. Of course not, the sheriff agreed smoothly, but proving it is another matter. The law, well, it favors family. He paused, his cold eyes moving between Virginia and Ryder. Unless, how old are you, Miss Davies? 22, she said. Then there is one solution, the sheriff said, a small, knowing smile touching his lips. He looked directly at Ryder. If she were married, her husband would have legal precedence. Her stepfather couldn't touch her. A thick, heavy silence fell over the room. Virginia stared at her hands, a hot blush creeping up her neck. The suggestion was outrageous, impossible. But it hung in the air, a potential shield against the storm that was coming for her. Thank you, Sheriff, Ryder said, his voice carefully neutral. We'll consider all our options. After the sheriff left, the tension in the small cabin was suffocating. Martha was scrubbing a pot with unnecessary vigor. Ryder stood at the window, his back to the room, staring out at the endless prairie. I should go, Virginia said, her voice barely a whisper. I've brought enough trouble here. Ryder turned and his face was hard. And I'll ask you again, Virginia. Go where? Back to him. No, of course not, she snapped, frustration boiling over. But I won't be the reason you're forced into some ridiculous marriage of convenience. Is that what you think this is about? He crossed the room in 2 long strides, stopping just in front of her. His proximity was overwhelming. My convenience? I'm not worried about myself. I'm worried about keeping you alive. His intensity was frightening, but not in the way Davies was frightening. This was the intensity of a coiled spring, of a man holding back a terrible force. She saw it in his eyes. He wasn't just a simple rancher. This man had a past, a dangerous one. That night, after a tense, quiet dinner, Ryder asked her to join him on the porch. The Montana sky was a breathtaking canvas of stars. Tell me about Boston, he said, his voice softer now. Before him, what did you dream of? The question caught her off guard. It had been so long since anyone had cared about her dreams. I used to love to read, she admitted, the memory a ghost of a happier time. My father had a library. I wanted to see the world in those books. Nakun, she gave a small, sad smile. I also wanted to teach. Ryder nodded slowly. We need a teacher here. The territory's growing. There are opportunities. He was trying to give her a future, a sliver of hope to cling to. He started talking about his own life, how he'd come west after his parents died, how he'd built this ranch from nothing. But his story felt incomplete. There were gaps, years he skipped over, shadows in his past he wasn't letting her see. As she stood to go inside, their hands brushed. An electric current shot up her arm. Their eyes met in the moonlight, and for a heart-stopping second, the air crackled with an unspoken tension. He took a half step back, clearing his throat. Get some sleep, Virginia, he said, his voice rough. Tomorrow and we'll figure out what to do. As she lay in her bed, staring into the darkness, a horrifying thought began to take shape. The sheriff's convenient solution. Ryder's hidden past. Martha's watchful, suspicious eyes. These people weren't just helping her. They were using her. She was a pawn in a game she didn't understand, and she had just walked right into the middle of the board. The next morning, a rider came galloping up to the ranch, his horse lathered in sweat. He practically fell out of the saddle, shouting for Ryder. Ryder emerged from the barn, rifle in hand, his movements fluid and practiced. He wasn't a rancher playing at being a gunman. He was a gunman playing at being a rancher. He came back into the cabin a few minutes later, his face grim. That was one of my hands from town. Thomas Davies has plastered posters everywhere. He's offering a reward for your return. Virginia's blood ran cold. He's not just claiming you ran away, Ryder continued, his eyes boring into hers. He's accusing you of stealing. Family heirlooms, he says. A large sum of cash. That's a lie, she cried. I took nothing. I know, Ryder said. But a lie is as good as the truth if people want to believe it. And a reward will make them want to believe it. It gives him a legal reason to have men searching for you. It gives the sheriff a reason to come here with a warrant. The trap was closing. What do we do? She whispered. Ryder ran a hand through his hair, pacing the small room like a caged wolf. The sheriff's suggestion, he said, the words tasting like poison. Marriage. It's the only thing that supersedes a stepfather's claim. It's the only thing that would make a theft charge look like a domestic dispute instead of a felony. So we get married? She asked, her voice numb. Yes, he said, his directness a slap in the face. It would be in name only, a legal shield, nothing more. When this is over, you be free to go. The practical, cold logic of it made sense, but it felt wrong. It felt like another cage, just with a different keeper. What's in it for you, Ryder? No man does something like this for nothing. A flicker of hurt crossed his face, so quick she almost missed it. Is it so hard to believe someone might just want to do the right thing? The words shamed her. This man had saved her, sheltered her, and was now offering to put his own name and reputation on the line to protect her, and she was questioning his motives. I'm sorry, she whispered. I've forgotten what goodness looks like. His expression softened. He stepped closer, taking her hands in his. They were rough, calloused, but his grip was gentle. I'm not asking for a wife, Virginia. I'm asking you to let me help you survive. We do this. We show the certificate to the sheriff, and Davies has no more power over you. It's a business arrangement. She looked up into his dark, unreadable eyes. She was still a pawn, she knew that. But maybe he wasn't her opponent. Maybe he was the only other piece on her side of the board. All right, she agreed, her voice barely audible. I'll do it. A wave of relief washed over his face, but it was quickly replaced by that same grim determination. Good. I'll ride to town now and speak to the preacher. We'll do it tomorrow. The sooner this is done, the better. As he turned to leave, Martha stepped out from the small kitchen. She had been listening the whole time. She held something in her hand, a small folded piece of oilskin. I found this, she said, her voice flat, sewn into the hem of your dress. You must have forgotten about it in your rush to get away. It wasn't a family heirloom. Virginia had taken only one thing, a sealed letter her mother had given her on her deathbed, with strict instructions. Keep this safe. Don't open it unless you are in the gravest danger. Don't trust anyone. Virginia had forgotten all about it. Now it lay in Martha's hand, a secret that suddenly felt more dangerous than the man hunting her. Ryder stopped, his eyes fixed on the oilskin packet. The air in the room grew thick with unspoken questions. This was no simple rescue. This was something else entirely, and she was standing right in the heart of it. Ryder's gaze flickered from the oilskin packet in Martha's hand to Virginia's face. The room was silent, charged with a new, dangerous electricity. What is it? He asked, his voice low. Virginia's mind raced. Don't trust anyone. Her mother's words echoed in her head. But looking at Ryder, at the hard set of his jaw and the protective fire in his eyes, she made a choice. She was done running. She was done being a victim. "It's from my mother," she said, her voice shaking slightly as she took the packet from Martha. "She gave it to me before she died. She told me to keep it safe." Ryder didn't press. He just nodded, his eyes telling her he understood. "Keep it. We'll deal with that later. Right now, we deal with Davies." The next day passed in a surreal haze. Martha found an old cream-colored dress that, with a few quick alterations, looked almost like a wedding gown. Ryder returned from town with a thin gold band and the news that the preacher, a nervous man named Reverend Michael, would be there in the morning. "Davies is still making noise," Ryder reported, his tone grim. "He's been seen talking to a man named Cyrus Blackwood. He's a land baron, owns half the valley and is always looking to own the other half. He's not a man you want for an enemy." That night, Virginia couldn't sleep. She stood in front of the small mirror, looking at the fading bruises on her face. Tomorrow she would become Mrs. Ryder Xavier, a stranger's wife, a legal fiction. A soft knock came at her door. It was Ryder. He held a small carved wooden box. "This was my mother's," he said, holding it out to her. She opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of worn velvet, was a delicate silver pendant on a thin chain. A single polished riverstone sat in the center. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "She said it brought her luck," he explained, his voice uncharacteristically soft. "Figured we could both use some of that." He took the necklace from the box. "May I?" She nodded, turning so he could fasten it around her neck. His fingers brushed against her skin, sending a shiver through her that had nothing to do with fear. When she faced him again, the space between them felt smaller, the air thinner. This was getting complicated. This was getting dangerous in a whole new way. "I should let you rest," he said, his voice a low rumble. He turned to leave, but she reached out, her fingers closing around his wrist. "Ryder," she began, then stopped. What could she say? "Thank you for saving my life and turning your own upside down?" Instead, she stood on her toes and pressed a soft, fleeting kiss to his cheek. His eyes darkened. He looked down at her, and for a terrifying moment, she thought he was going to kiss her properly. Instead, he just nodded once, his expression unreadable, and left the room, closing the door softly behind him. The morning of the wedding dawned bright and clear. The preacher arrived, a small, bird-like man who kept wringing his hands. Sheriff Miller was there to act as a witness, his presence feeling less like a comfort and more like a threat. Virginia stood beside Ryder in the main room of the cabin, the simple words of the ceremony washing over her. It didn't feel real. None of it did, until Ryder took her hand and slipped the cold gold band onto her finger. The weight of it was a shock, a sudden, undeniable reality. "Pronounce you husband and wife," the preacher finished, his voice trembling slightly. "You may, kiss the bride." Ryder hesitated for a fraction of a second before leaning in. His kiss was brief, chaste, a dry press of lips. But in that single moment of contact, she felt a tremor pass through him. He was just as terrified as she was. Sheriff Miller clapped Ryder on the back, a little too heartily. "Congratulations, Xavier. This should settle things with Davies." He handed Ryder the official marriage certificate. "Legally, she's all yours now, but a man like Davies, he doesn't always play by the rules. Be careful." The warning sounded more like a threat. After the sheriff and preacher left, a crushing silence descended on the cabin. Martha busied herself in the kitchen, giving them a wide berth. "So," Ryder said, breaking the quiet, "Mrs. Xavier." The name felt foreign, a costume she was wearing. "It doesn't feel real," she admitted. "Nothing has to change," he said quickly. "This is just a piece of paper. You're safe. That's all that matters." She looked at him, really looked at him, this man who was now her husband. "What do you want, Ryder? You've risked everything for me. Why?" He was quiet for a long time, his gaze distant. When he finally answered, his voice was heavy. "I want this ranch to succeed. I want to build a life here." His eyes met hers and she saw a flicker of profound sadness. "And I want to make sure what happened to my family never happens to anyone else." Before she could ask what he meant, he changed the subject, his walls going right back up. but she had seen it. A glimpse of the wound he carried, the ghost that drove him. The next 2 weeks were a strange sort of truce. They settled into a routine. Virginia helped Martha, tended a small garden, and found a quiet peace in the rhythm of the work. Ryder began teaching her how to ride, his patience and quiet confidence slowly chipping away at her fear. In the evenings, they would talk on the porch, careful to keep the conversation on safe, neutral topics. The ranch, the weather, books she had read. They were orbiting each other like two planets, held together by a gravity they refused to acknowledge. The marriage certificate was tucked away in a drawer, a silent, ticking bomb. Then Sheriff Miller returned. He rode up one afternoon, his face a grim mask. Davies left town, he announced without preamble, but not before he spent a lot of time with Cyrus Blackwood. They were asking questions, Ryder, about this ranch, about your parents. A cold dread washed over Virginia. She saw Ryder's hand clench into a fist at his side. What about my parents? Ryder asked, his voice dangerously calm. The sheriff shrugged. Just questions. How they died. Who held the deed to this land before you? He looked from Ryder to Virginia. A man like Davies, when he feels cheated, he gets vindictive. He digs for things. You two stay watchful. The sheriff rode off, leaving a trail of dust and poison in his wake. That night, the fragile peace between them shattered. Ryder was quiet, cleaning his rifle by the fire, his movements precise and deadly. This is my fault, Virginia said, twisting the wedding band on her finger. I've brought this danger to you, to your home. This isn't your fault, Ryder said, not looking up from his work. This storm was coming long before you arrived. You just got caught in the wind. He finally looked at her, his eyes burning with an intensity that made her breath catch. Davies isn't the real threat here. He's just a dog. Cyrus Blackwood is the man holding the leash. He stood up, pacing in front of the fireplace. Blackwood has wanted this land for years. My father refused to sell. He said there was something wrong with Blackwood's deeds, that his claims were built on lies. The pieces started to click into place. What happened to your parents? She whispered, afraid of the answer. Ryder's face was a mask of grief and fury. It was ruled a cattle stampede, a freak accident. But I was there. I was just a boy. I saw a rider in the distance, watching, a rider on a big black horse, Cyrus Blackwood's horse. The room grew cold. This wasn't about her anymore. It had never been just about her. She had run from one monster right into the den of another. Ryder, she said, her voice trembling. She pulled the oilskin packet from her pocket. My mother. Before she married Davies, her maiden name was Blackwood. Ryder froze, his back to her. He turned around slowly, his face pale. She was Cyrus Blackwood's sister, Virginia whispered. She ran away from him years ago. She said he was a thief and a murderer. The letter, the secret her mother had told her to protect. It wasn't just a letter. It was a weapon, and she had just brought it into the one place on earth Cyrus Blackwood wanted to destroy. The silence in the cabin was a living thing, heavy and suffocating. Ryder stared at the oilskin packet in her hand, as if it were a coiled rattlesnake. Blackwood's sister, he repeated, the words hollow. All this time, he's been looking for you, hasn't he? Not Davies. It was all starting to make a horrifying kind of sense. Davies wasn't just a drunken brute trying to pay off a gambling debt. He was a tool, Blackwood's tool. He had married Virginia's mother to get his hands on whatever secret she was hiding. And when she died, that secret passed to Virginia. We have to open it, Ryder said, his voice grim. Virginia's hands trembled as she broke the wax seal her mother had placed there years ago. Inside wasn't a letter. It was a legal document, an original deed, with names and dates that had been crossed out and rewritten. And at the bottom, a sworn affidavit, written in her mother's elegant hand. It told a story of theft and murder. It detailed how Cyrus Blackwood had systematically forged documents, stealing land from his neighbors. The final page was the most damning. It was the original deed to this very ranch. It wasn't in the name of Ryder's father. It was in the name of Martha's late husband. And below that, a note from Virginia's mother. Cyrus killed him for this land, then forged the sale to the Xaviers to cover his tracks. He drove them to their deaths next. He will not stop until he has it all. Martha, the quiet, kind housekeeper. She wasn't just an employee. She was the rightful owner of this land. Ryder sank into a chair, the color draining from his face. All my life, he whispered, I've been living on stolen land. You didn't know, Virginia said, her hand going to his shoulder. Your father didn't know. Blackwood used him. He used all of you. Suddenly Martha was there, standing in the doorway to the kitchen, her face a stony mask. I knew, she said, her voice devoid of emotion. I knew what Blackwood did to my husband, and I knew this Xavier's were innocent people caught in his web. When they were killed and you were sent away, Ryder, I stayed. I watched this land. I waited. I knew one day the truth would come out. The quiet housekeeper was a pillar of iron-willed patience, a woman who had spent years waiting for vengeance. This changes everything, Ryder said, his head in his hands. No, Virginia said, her voice ringing with a newfound strength. This ends everything. She held up the deed. This is the proof. This is what he's been hunting me for. He doesn't want to sell me. He wants to bury me, along with this secret. The game had changed. The stakes weren't just her life anymore. It was justice for Ryder's parents, for Martha's husband. It was for the soul of this entire valley. But they were three people against the most powerful man in the territory. A man who had the law in his pocket and a legion of hired guns at his command. A week passed in a state of high alert. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Every gust of wind sounded like approaching hoofbeats. Ryder sent his most trusted ranch hands to patrol the property lines, but it felt like trying to hold back the tide with a teacup. The confrontation was coming. They all knew it. One evening, as Virginia was harvesting the last of the summer vegetables from the garden, she heard them. Three riders approaching from the east, moving at a steady, confident pace. Her heart leaped into her throat. At the front was the hunched, hateful silhouette of her stepfather, Thomas Davies. Ryder! She screamed, dropping her basket and running for the barn. He emerged instantly, the Winchester rifle already in his hands. He took one look at the approaching riders, and his face became a granite mask. Get inside, he commanded, his voice leaving no room for argument. Find Martha. Stay away from the windows. This time she didn't argue. She ran to the cabin, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Martha was already at the window, her face grim. It's him, she said, and two of Blackwood's men. Virginia watched as Ryder walked calmly to the front of the house, the rifle held at his side, casual but ready. He was a lone figure standing against the coming storm. Xavier! Davy's voice was a triumphant sneer. I hear you've been harboring stolen property. I'm here to collect what's mine. This is private land, Davies. Ryder's voice was impossibly calm. State your business or get off it. Davies let out a harsh, ugly laugh. My business is my stepdaughter, the little thief who ran off with my property, and I've got a warrant here from Sheriff Miller to search your home and retrieve her. He held up a piece of paper. The law. Blackwood was using the law as a weapon. There's no one here by that name, Ryder said, his voice flat and cold. Don't play games with me, Xavier, Davies spat. Word is you married a girl just a few weeks back, a girl matching her description. Now are you going to step aside, or do my friends here have to move you? Davies and his men spread out, their hands hovering over the pistols at their hips. It was a trap. They wanted Ryder to make a move. They wanted an excuse to gun him down. Ryder shifted his stance, bringing the rifle up slightly. My wife is none of your concern, he said, his voice dropping to a low growl. And that warrant isn't worth the paper it's printed on without the sheriff here to serve it. Now I'm telling you for the last time. Leave. Davy's face contorted in a mask of fury. His hand flashed toward his gun. I'm not leaving without the girl. What happened next was a blur. A shot rang out, but it wasn't from Ryder or Davies's men. It came from the cabin window. One of Blackwood's hired guns grunted and crumpled to the ground, clutching a bloody shoulder. Everyone froze. In the window of the cabin stood Martha, an old double-barreled shotgun smoking in her hands. Her face was a terrifying vision of righteous fury. The next one won't be in the shoulder, she said, her voice carrying across the yard with chilling clarity. The momentary distraction was all Ryder needed. He moved with a speed that was inhuman, closing the distance to Davies and bringing the butt of his rifle up in a brutal arc. Davies went down with a sickening crunch. The remaining gunman, his face pale with shock, hesitated for a fatal second. Ryder's rifle was already leveled, the hammer cocked. "Drop it," Ryder ordered. The man's gun thudded to the dirt. It was over. For now. But as Ryder stood over the groaning form of Thomas Davies, another rider appeared on the ridge. Sheriff Miller, arriving just a little too late to be of any help, or perhaps just in time to clean up the mess. He trotted his horse into the yard, his eyes taking in the scene. The wounded gunman, Davies on the ground, Ryder and Martha armed and ready. "Well, well, Ryder," the sheriff said, his voice dripping with false concern. "Looks like you've got yourself a real problem here. Assaulting a man who was just trying to retrieve his legal property. That's a serious offense." "He drew on me, Sheriff," Ryder said, his voice cold as ice, "and he was trespassing." "Was he?" Miller swung down from his horse. "I've got a signed warrant here, and I've got a witness." He gestured to the remaining gunman. "He'll testify you fired first." The trap hadn't been to kill Ryder. It had been to arrest him, to get him out of the way so Blackwood could move in and take what he wanted, including Virginia. "It's a lie," Virginia said, stepping out onto the porch. She couldn't hide any longer. Miller's eyes lit up when he saw her. "Miss Davies, or should I say Mrs. Xavier, I'm glad to see you're unharmed. Now, if you'll just come with me, we can sort all this out down in town." "She's not going anywhere," Ryder said. "That's not your choice to make," Miller replied, his hand moving to rest on the butt of his pistol. "You're under arrest, Ryder, for assault and obstruction of justice." It was happening. They were losing. But then Virginia looked at Ryder, and she saw it. A tiny, almost imperceptible nod. A signal. It was time. "You're right, Sheriff," she said, her voice clear and strong. "Ryder did obstruct you, but you're not here to investigate a theft. You're here to cover up a murder." Miller froze. His face went pale. "What in God's name are you talking about, girl?" Virginia held up the oilskin packet. "I'm talking about this ranch, and the man you and Cyrus Blackwood murdered to get it. I'm talking about Martha's husband." The sheriff's composure cracked. For a split second, pure, naked fear showed in his eyes. He knew. He knew they had the proof. "That's a crazy accusation," he stammered, his hand tightening on his gun. "Is it?" a new voice called out. From behind the barn, two men stepped out. They were dressed in dusty trail clothes, but the silver stars pinned to their vests shone in the afternoon sun. Federal marshals. "Sheriff Miller," the lead marshal said, his voice booming across the yard. "We've been watching you for a long time, listening to Mr. Blackwood's telegraph messages. We just needed something concrete. I believe this young lady has just provided it." Sheriff Miller's face crumpled. He was caught. His eyes darted around, looking for an escape that wasn't there. Then his gaze landed on Virginia. It was all her fault. With a primal scream of rage, he drew his pistol, not at the marshals, not at Ryder, but at her. Ryder moved like a lightning strike. He didn't have time to raise his rifle. He simply launched himself forward, shoving Virginia to the ground and taking the bullet meant for her. He cried out, a sharp gasp of pain, as he collapsed beside her, a dark stain spreading across his shoulder. The world dissolved into chaos. The marshals opened fire. Miller went down in a hail of bullets. Martha stood on the porch, shotgun at the ready, her face a mask of grim satisfaction. Virginia scrambled to Ryder's side, her hands pressing against the wound, warm blood seeping through her fingers. "Ryder!" she cried, her voice choked with panic. He looked up at her, his face pale but his eyes were clear. "I told you," he whispered, a faint smile touching his lips. "I promised to protect you." The emotional storm that followed was a blur. The marshals took Davies and their remaining gunmen into custody. They promised that a warrant for Cyrus Blackwood's arrest was already on its way. Justice, it seemed, was finally coming to the valley. But all Virginia cared about was the man bleeding in her arms. They got him inside, and Martha, with a skill that spoke of long, hard years on the frontier, cleaned and bandaged the wound. The bullet had gone clean through his shoulder. It was bad, but he would live. As he lay on his bed, pale and weak but alive, Virginia sat beside him, holding his hand. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion and a terrifying, overwhelming emotion. "Why did you do it?" she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "You could have been killed." He squeezed her hand weakly. "There are some things worth dying for, Virginia." His eyes held hers, and in their depths, she finally saw the truth he'd been hiding. Not a dark past, but a deep, unspoken feeling. I think, I think I've been falling in love with you since the moment I found you hiding behind my barn." The word struck her with the force of a physical blow. Love. It was a word that had been twisted and poisoned by her stepfather, a word she no longer believed in. But hearing it from Ryder, seeing the raw honesty in his eyes, she felt something inside her crack open. I, she started, but the words wouldn't come. She didn't know how she felt. She was grateful. She admired him. She was drawn to his strength. But love? He seemed to understand her silence. "It's all right," he murmured, his eyes drifting closed as the pain and blood loss took their toll. "Just stay." And she did. She stayed by his side through the night, listening to his shallow breathing, the gold band on her finger, a heavy, constant reminder of the promise they had made. A promise made of lies that had somehow led them to this terrible, beautiful truth. In the days that followed, as Ryder slowly began to heal, the world outside their small cabin shifted. Cyrus Blackwood, realizing the game was up, tried to flee but was caught by the federal marshals. The evidence in Virginia's mother's letter was undeniable. His empire, built on lies and blood, came crashing down. The deed to the ranch was returned to its rightful owner, Martha. The first thing she did was sign it over to Ryder. "This is your home," she told him. "You and your father paid for it, just not in money." With the threat of Blackwood and Davies gone forever, a quiet peace settled over the ranch. But between Virginia and Ryder, a new tension grew. His confession hung in the air between them, unanswered. Their marriage, a shield they no longer needed, was now a cage of a different sort. One evening, about a month after the shooting, they sat on the porch together, watching the sunset. Ryder's arm was still in a sling, but the color had returned to his face. "You're free to go, you know," he said quietly, not looking at her. "The arrangement is over. You're safe now. You can have the marriage annulled. Go east. Be a teacher. Live the life you wanted." Each word was a hammer blow to her heart. She imagined leaving, getting on a train, heading back to the civilized world of Boston. And the image was gray and empty. The life she thought she wanted felt like a ghost. Her real life, the one that mattered, had started the day she collapsed behind a barn in Montana. "Is that what you want?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. He finally turned to look at her, and the pain in his eyes was so profound it stole her breath. "What I want," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "is for you to be happy, even if it's not with me." She stood up and walked to the edge of the porch, looking out at the vast, beautiful land that had almost destroyed her and had then saved her. She twisted the wedding band on her finger. It no longer felt like a lie. It felt like a promise. "I used to dream of a different life," she said, her back to him. "A life of books and quiet classrooms. A safe life. But I've learned that safety isn't a place. It's a person." She turned to face him. The setting sun haloed her hair in gold. "All my life, men have tried to own me. My father, my stepfather. They saw me as property, a thing to be used. But you never have. You saw me, the real me, bruised and broken and terrified. And you didn't try to own me. You tried to free me." She walked back to him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. She knelt in front of his chair, taking his good hand in hers. "I don't want to leave, Ryder. I don't want to annul anything. This sham marriage, it's become the most real thing in my life." She saw the hope dawn in his eyes, fragile and bright. "I love you, Virginia Xavier," she said, the words feeling like coming home. "I think I started falling for you the moment you took my hand in the dark and promised me I wasn't alone anymore." He leaned forward, his forehead resting against hers. A single tear escaped his eye and traced a path through the dust on his cheek. "I thought I'd lost you," he whispered. "You found me," she corrected softly. "You'll always find me." He tilted his head, and this time when he kissed her, there was no hesitation. It wasn't the chaste press of a legal ceremony or the desperate kiss of a confession. It was a kiss of homecoming, of promises kept and a future finally beginning. Their life together was built on the ashes of a violent past, but from those ashes grew something strong and true. Virginia did become a teacher, starting a small school for the children of the valley right there on the ranch. Ryder's herd grew, and the Xavier Ranch became known not for its size but for its integrity. Their home was filled with laughter and eventually with the sounds of their own children. They had started as two strangers, bound by circumstance and violence, a rancher with a hidden past and a woman with a dangerous secret. But in that crucible of fear, they forged a love that was stronger than any legal document, a testament to the fact that sometimes the greatest treasures are found when you're hiding in the dark, just waiting for someone to light a candle. If you enjoyed this story of justice and unexpected love on the frontier, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss our next video.